Hey everyone, I just want to record a quick summary of empathy. You've gone through some of the module materials. You've seen also a longer discussion about ACEs. Important characteristics that you need to remember is that ACEs are the content areas, the situations that come up around which it's really important that you're able to effectively show empathy. And so I'm going to give you kind of a breakdown of really a simple, clear description of empathy. So on the final paper that you write, it needs to be structured in this format. When you think about how to show good empathy, it should be structured in some of the same principles that I'm going to explain here. And so the first thing in showing good empathy is that you want to be able to express that you've never been there. Even if you've experienced something very similar, you want to express that you don't know exactly what they're going through. One of the things that shuts people down most when they're going through a really difficult time is to have somebody else from a position of authority, from a position of comfort and safety of where they think you're at in life, say to them, I know what you're going through. And so, especially in a professional situation, if you're friends with somebody and you've been friends for 20 years and they know that you've gone through something similar, it's different to be able to say, I know what you're going through. But as a professional, if you're a teacher or if you're a therapist or if you're a caseworker, they don't know you very well. And they definitely don't know if what you're saying is accurate. So one of the worst things that you can say in a situation where somebody's telling you of their difficulty and the struggle that they're having is, I know what you're going through. You need to not be so sure of what you interpret is their experience. And so in some way, the first thing that you need to do is acknowledge that you don't know what they're going through, that you haven't been there, that you haven't experienced that. And you don't have to do that in a condescending way. You don't have to say, well, I'm glad I've never done that. You can just say, you know, I've never gone through that. But comes to the second part of a good empathetic statement. I can imagine that, or I believe that. And so it suggests that what you're about to say is coming from your brain and not from your experience. And that's important because it's easier for somebody to challenge what you think and what you imagine as opposed to what you experience. So if you say, I've been there, I know exactly what you feel, and I felt X, Y, or Z, they have to tell you what you felt was wrong in order to suggest that what you're saying to them isn't accurate. And so it's really important that you are able to say, I don't know for sure what you're feeling. I'm not sure what that's like. I haven't been there. I haven't experienced anything like that. But I can imagine that if I did, and this comes to the third part, I would feel X, or it would feel like X. And so you're articulating to them, I don't know what you've been through. I don't know what this has been like for you. But I believe that if I was in that situation, I would feel really scared that it was never going to end. I would feel really afraid that my children weren't going to grow up knowing what safety and security felt like. And so a couple of important characteristics about that. You're articulating to them something that you intentionally want to be close, but not necessarily always be exactly spot on. Because you get some good information if you've given a good empathetic statement and they say, yes, that's exactly what I feel like. But you get better information if they say, well, it's kind of like that, but it's really like ... Because if you're close but not spot on, they can share with you what is spot on for them. They can share with you what they're experiencing. And then you know from their words what they're going through. And you can refer back to that in their words. And so a good empathetic statement isn't necessarily one that's accurate and one that fits every time. It's one that creates an environment for them to share with you. What you want them to see is that you're trying to understand their experience and that you want them to share with you what it is like for them. And so a good empathetic statement is also one that they can challenge, that they can say, no, that's not what is happening. When I work with individuals, I will oftentimes think I know what they're feeling and choose an empathetic statement that points to something that's kind of close. And then encourage them. Now tell me if that's not what you're feeling. Tell me if you're feeling something else, and get them to share through the empathetic statement that I've shared with them, and get them to share what it is like for them. And that really helps them to be able to move from experience in here to have it come out and talk about it and articulate it. It helps them. Good empathetic statements help people process their own experience better. Because as they hear you say it in an articulate and clear way, they can think to themselves, yeah, that fits, or no, that doesn't, but they can process it for themselves. And that's really, really critical. So the other part of this is, because you've made this something that's come from your brain and not your experience, and you've said, I can imagine that, or I believe that, or I think that, I would feel X, Y, or Z. The other and maybe most critical part of this is what you end with. And this is where most, especially early professionals, get tripped up. Because they say terrible empathetic statements like, I've never been there. I've never had my spouse leave me and run away with their secretary. But I can imagine that it would be hard. It would be hard is a stupid statement, because it's it would be hard. I've never had my child diagnosed with cancer, but I can imagine that would be tough. Well, you think, like, seriously, that's the best we could come up with, is that would be hard, that might be tough. Okay, a good empathetic statement has to go into a lot more depth than hard, tough, difficult. So on the final paper, I don't want to see any, that would be hard, that would be tough, that would be difficult. When we meet in person later on, I don't want to see any and hear any people using that would be hard, that would be tough. These have to be explicit, clear. You have to think about it for just a second. So the next few slides are going to give you some context, and the discussion board is going to give you a context to think about a little more depth besides that would be hard. Well, of course it would be hard. Of course it's hard to have our spouse leave us. Of course it's hard to have our child diagnosed with cancer. Of course all the ACEs are hard. That doesn't help you or them. Now, that's really hard, an appropriate and completely appropriate statement for you to say to one of your friends? Sure, possibly that's a great statement, but it's not in a professional setting because they don't know you well enough. And so if you're using that with friends, don't think, oh my gosh, that's terrible, or it works with my friends, I should still use it in a professional setting, because it's not your friends. It's the parent of one of the kids in your class. It's the person who you're trying to work with in therapy. It's the person who your case is to help them navigate the system. It's the parent of one of your kids at the YMCA. These are professional settings, and you have to use more effective professional language when you're showing empathy. Of all of the modules, I think empathy and goals will take the most intentionality and creativity. You have to think about it for just a second in order to do it. You can't just go with something simple like hard. And when we get to goals, when you're trying to make those goals consistent with your theory, it's hard, it's difficult, okay? And one of the important things about empathy is you need to take a few seconds to think about where it comes from. And so in those moments, you can say something like, wow. And then you can pause for a second as you try to think, what would that be like? And you can even say something like, I'm just sitting here thinking, what would that be like for me? I've never experienced anything like that before. I can imagine that if I was in your shoes, I would feel really unstable, like I didn't know where my source of security and safety was coming from. And so you create something that is you actually legitimately putting yourself in that place and thinking, what might it be like for me? That requires you to think clearly. Again, when we're talking about staying prefrontal cortex and not trauma brain, it's critical for you to have something to focus on. And so how would I respond? What might I feel? What might they feel is something to think about clearly. Okay, So a couple of important things about empathy. 3 characteristics that I need to see in good empathetic statements. I've never been there, never done that, never experienced that. Even if you've experienced something close, you haven't experienced exactly what they're experiencing because you don't know their background, you don't know their life, and you don't know yours is exactly like theirs. Okay, so articulate that you don't know what they're going through. Second thing, I can imagine, I can believe, I can think something that's coming from your brain. Articulate that what you're about to say is something that you're creating in your brain, you're imagining, you're believing, you're thinking. And then finally, make a good statement about what that might be like. Put yourself in their place. What might it be like to be in that spot right at that moment? Empathy is a powerful thing. Once you've made a good first solid concrete statement of empathy, you don't have to repeat those steps every time. That should be your first statement of empathy. After that, you can just say things like, wow, or I don't even know what to say. And when you say something like that and you pause and give them some space, they recognize that what you want is them to share more with you so you can understand better. And so when you say, wow, or I don't even know what to say, and then you pause, they will naturally fill it in. They will naturally share stuff with you. And so learn to make those kind of declarative statements that just open it up for them to continue to share with you. And that will reap tremendous rewards. I used to have this assignment in this class 8 or 9 years ago, where I would tell the students, okay, what your job is you're going to go and you're going to practice being empathetic to somebody in the union or somebody at Walmart or things like this. And as was an extra credit assignment. And what happened was 2 things that made me get rid of the assignment. One was that students would go to the union, they'd see somebody that looked like they were struggling, they'd sit down, they'd start to talk to them, they'd make a really powerful empathetic statement, and then the person would talk to them for 3 hours. One student I had even got a wrong number one day and tried to start the conversation, made an empathetic statement and said that they were on the phone for like 2 or 3 hours talking to somebody who was telling them about all the terrible things going on in their life. And then they contacted me saying, what am I supposed to do about this? It was a wrong number. I don't even know who the person was. Okay, so one reason I stopped doing it is because when you are powerfully and effectively empathetic, people will share tons of information with you, even if they don't know you very well. The second reason is that it ended up turning into a whole bunch of people saying, yeah, I was really empathetic with this person in the union and I got a date. And I decided that, like, I don't want to be responsible for the false advertising of encouraging you all to be super empathetic and the person listening to you to feel like, this person is so understanding, I love this, let's go on a date, when you were just practicing an assignment. Okay, so I didn't want the responsibility of that, so we got rid of that assignment. But it is powerful when you practice empathy, even if you don't know the person. It can be tremendously powerful in any kind of setting. So it's important for you to think about and practice empathy. We're going to have some discussion board options and ideas that are going to allow you to do this, and some other activities that are going to help you practice empathy. But remember those 3 characteristics, and remember the hardest part is the third and final one. The hardest part is coming up with something good and not just saying tough, hard, really difficult. Come up with something that's legitimate and good. All right, thanks.